Our song, Unbreakable, is about guerrilla warfare.
But guerrilla and partisan warfare is often very much misunderstood.
It's under crimson skies, hell's horizon, our trap will spring. Unaware of our presence, they'll be marching straight to their doom.
A hail of bullets flies from the forest to decimate a supply column. A knife cuts the throat of a collaborating politician. A bomb tears the crucial railway line apart. In total war, there are no unfair methods nor dishonorable techniques. There is just preserve one's own strength and destroy the enemy. But what if the enemy enjoys not only numerical superiority, but technical superiority as well? When he marches freely through the country he has occupied, oppressing and tormenting the native population. Guerrilla warfare is often erroneously perceived as single-minded or even primitive, but this is only true on a technological level. Tolstoy once wrote that guerrilla war was raised in all its menacing and majestic power, and troubling itself about no question of anyone's taste or rules, about no fine distinctions, with stupid simplicity, with perfect consistency. The guerrilla or partisan fighter may indeed not rely on complex machinery, heavy weaponry, or even computers, like his enemy might have freely at hand, but he instead can overcome and even compensate for those disadvantages with iron conviction and the power of his intellect. Thus do the common folk become warriors. Some prominent examples in modern or nearly modern history are the fighting during the American Revolutionary War, the fighting in Spain against Napoleon, the Libyan struggle against Italy, the Moroccan uprising against France. Smaller or weaker forces, determined and seemingly impossible to catch, fought a war of attrition against a foreign oppressor. But if you hear the word partisan, you're generally reminded of the resistance fighters of the 20th century. Technically, the word refers to any resistance or guerrilla fighter that is ideologically or emotionally attached to a cause or side that they are informally associated with. So partisans can be of any variety of political convictions. But Sabaton were mainly thinking of the Soviet partisan fighters behind the German lines of World War II when doing this song. So I will focus slightly more on communist partisans in this episode.
We are prepared for war, ready for fire, stand by to charge, counting down as they march into destruction. Their time has come.
The father of modern guerrilla war may well be Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese communists. In 1937, he wrote down his teachings about China's anti-Japanese struggle in his pamphlet Yu Qi Shan. Mao was determined to fight even the most radical war to free China from both external and internal enemies. Not only was his impoverished country occupied by the Japanese, but he was also opposed by the Chinese nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek. To achieve his goal, to become strong enough to face his enemies in the field and take control of the country, he and his forces had to rely on tactics that were both conspiratorial and hidden. Sabotage and terrorism were tools to liquidate collaborators and reactionary elements of the state, like police and politicians. But kidnapping hostages, strong-arming merchants, and gathering information were just a step on the way. The goal was the liberation of the country, and this was only achievable by liberating its people, right? Mao and his men had to rely on the support of the masses, on the common folk to supply them with food, volunteers, information. Despite their readiness to use violence, the war was as much about propaganda and political agitation. Explain, persuade, convince, said Mao. This way, you draw the will of the people to your cause. And in an area sympathetic to his partisans' cause, the invaders had to see every man, every woman, and every child as a potential agent of the opposition. The guerrillas would be here, there, everywhere, and nowhere, and there were thousands of eyes watching the enemy, always watching. It was crucial for their survival to keep the initiative, and the guerrilla would only engage the enemy under conditions of their own choosing. Guerrilla warfare was about distraction and surprise, about mobility and deception. The enemy would unknowingly move into a trap where short, vicious fight would destroy them. And the real front line of the guerrillas was the rear of the enemy, because it was there that their war would feed, stealing arms, supplies, and medicine. But if the odds were against them, the fighters would disperse as quickly as they had struck. Guerrillas had to be professionals when it came to running away. They were not to stand and fight, and never be dragged into a fight where their freedom of movement was limited. If they became static in their tactics, if they became unorganized, then they would be nothing more than vagabonds, bandits, and anarchists. All this proved to be true, not only to Mao, but to others on the European continent as well. In 1941, the war machine of Nazi Germany reached its high-water mark. Hitler had once envisioned conquering most of Greater Russia, all the way up to the Ural Mountains. But after his advance halted late in the year, and the Soviet Union did not come crashing down before the might of the German panzers, it was clear that a lengthy wartime occupation of the territory taken was necessary. Where the Germans could, they established Reichskommissariats and general governments, like in Poland and Ukraine, and tried to rely on local police and security forces to keep the peace. But even in Poland, occupied right from the start of the war, the Germans failed to destroy the underground resistance movement, the nationalistic Armia Krajowa, whose actions would culminate with the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, sabotaged the German war effort and kept the spirit of a free Polish state alive, until the movement was crushed, though not by the Nazis, but by the Soviets. The Germans had to deal with organized resistance groups on all fronts, though. In the East, the occupation forces failed to exploit the existing anti-Soviet feeling in many regions, and instead further alienated most of the population in Eastern Europe, Greater Russia, and the Balkans with harsh and inhumane occupation policy. Oppression, harassment, abuse, and persecution by Nazi officials drove many people to militant resistance.
They never knew we gave no warning. We set a trap, they took the bait. Cut off, retreat, release.
Before the German invasion, Joseph Stalin had banned local partisan forces, since it would not only show a lack of confidence in the regular forces, but could also potentially backfire on him. Nevertheless, the NKVD, the Soviet secret police, had already experimented with irregular destruction battalions, and as the war with Germany got going, they were quick to call upon the Otriadi groups made of scattered Red Army troops, party officials, and political officers to keep on fighting behind the German lines. In 1942, Moscow began officially organizing party-led partisan groups. By 1943, there were an estimated 130,000 irregulars operating in the German rear. 80% of the Soviet partisans operated in the area of Central Russia and Byelorussia, where thick forests and swampy marshes were ideal hiding places and refuges. In the Balkans, the Chetniks, experienced from decades of guerrilla warfare, could rely on an already existing network that supported quick evasion and harassment tactics. Communist guerrilla leader Joseph Broz Tito organized the Odredi partisan groups to operate in Serbia, Bosnia, and Montenegro. In northern Bosnia, he was so successful that it was soon known as Tito-land, and by 1943, the Chetniks were 250,000 men strong. His proletarian brigades began attacking Italian and Croatian outposts, but also had to constantly evade elite SS units and German commandos that were mercilessly hunting them. The partisan threat became reality as more and more German soldiers fell prey to ambushes. Numerous cases of murdered patrols and ravaged supply columns caused Heinrich Himmler to task his ruthless SS police commandos specifically with anti-partisan operations. But the territories were often too vast to patrol, and only highly organized operations had any sort of short-term success, since the partisans simply disappeared and dispersed in the face of strong opposition. So the Axis powers organized Schutzmannschaften and so-called Eastern battalions made out of auxiliaries, often Hungarians, Slovaks, Romanians, or Ukrainians, and regular German police. These security divisions set out to destroy partisan cells by all means possible, and often just did the dirty work for the SS, like rounding up Jews, Soviet sympathizers, and other undesirables accused of partisan activities. Whole villages were burned down, and many innocent people were butchered in an attempt to discourage partisan activity. That ruthlessness, of course, backfired and drove even more people, with nothing left to lose, into the ranks of the partisans. The term partisan is often associated with communist guerrilla fighters, but there were, of course, also non-communist resistant factions, often nationalistic or constitutionalist. They hated communism as much as they did the Nazis, and engaged in a three-way war for the future of the country. In the long term, though, in Europe, only Tito's partisans achieved what Mao had envisioned, to become more than just a guerrilla force fighting the foreign invaders. Tito and Mao were able to liberate themselves and stay in power, because revolutionary guerrilla warfare differs from just armed resistance against the occupying enemy. For Mao, the guerrilla fighter had to be a political warrior as well. He would lead by personal example, and through firm education would convince himself and the people around him of the righteousness of his struggle. His fight was not against, but for the interest of the people. At the end would be nothing less than the transformation of the whole country into revolutionary war until liberation. You can draw some comparisons between Mao and the ancient Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu and their writings about warfare. And Mao's teachings about guerrilla warfare would soon inspire other causes, like the struggle of Ho Chi Minh in Indochina, or the socialist fight in Cuba, for example. Now, before you write in about the tens of millions of people who lost their lives in Mao's wars and others, I am aware of that, and I am not condoning nor condemning, simply explaining that while guerrilla warfare can effectively cripple an invader, revolutionary guerrilla warfare can raise a political guerrilla leader to power, drawing mass support that a non-political cannot.
Victims of the ambush, stains the ground with blood, fields of execution, murderous plans.
Now, when you wrote this, because this is it's the lyrics are a little more they were complex for me and Markus to do the writing for.
Why?
Because like a song like 40 to 1. Okay, that's pretty obvious.
Yeah. This becomes a little bit more tricky.
Yeah.
And the story behind the song has a bit slipped out of our minds.
Okay.
So we found the story. Obviously, we are trying to find stories. It's for the Art of War album.
Sure.
So we are trying to find stories that connects to each individual chapter of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. For this specific chapter, we found many events.
Yeah.
And I think that we focused on one of them, and then we forgot which exactly event it was. So thank you for reinventing and doing research and finding out about a song that we basically forgot what we wrote about.
Well, that was funny because it was Markus who did the first research for this and gave me a draft, and then I tweaked it and changed it and stuff. And we talked a little bit about, well, we want to get some more the difference between revolutionary guerrillas and regular guerrilla warfare. That's guerrilla warfare like you're used to. But if you have like Tito and Mao Zedong, this is revolutionary guerrilla warfare where you become an object of respect and adoration with your people, and that can actually lead to you actually running the country, which is not usually what you're trying to do with guerrilla warfare. You're trying to throw someone out of your country most of the time. So it's interesting to see the dichotomy there, and I don't know if that's exciting or boring for people, but that's what we were trying to do with this song that you forgot what it was about.
It's a very interesting song as well. I mean, if you think about it, it's basically two songs melt into one.
Yeah.
Starts off slow and very heavy, and this guitar riff that seems to go like and very slow, and then it speeds up to become some classic rock song in the end. And it's why some fans have difficulties to really appreciate this song.
And is there any specific reason why just this song did that, or is it just...
The song started out as the slow one.
Yeah.
We rehearsed it very much like that.
Okay.
We couldn't make it interesting. We couldn't continue. We couldn't develop it because the heavy riff was already so powerful.
And where do you go?
How do we build the rest of the song? We couldn't. So that's why we let the song die and restart with something. And we tried it and actually made it to work. And for me, it's a very interesting song these days.
And we can hear a little bit of it right now. Both parts, please.
Our time is now already at us.
All right, and now, is it you that wrote the lyrics? Or
Me and Joakim wrote the lyrics for this one, and I think we both had a little bit of a brain freeze afterwards. And over those years, we didn't thought about the background of the song that much.
All right.
And there has been several people who have been trying to identify, like it must be this battle, it must be this, and now you have done another one,
several people trying to identify which battle it was.
which is quite entertaining for us to hear people how they, it must be this, it must be
Right.
this.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, I'm glad that it worked out like this, because this was a really fun one. This was the most challenging one so far to do the research and the writing for.
I can imagine.
Because you have to figure out how you're going to spin it and stuff. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that song, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. So, Paris, say goodbye to everybody.
Okay, goodbye everybody, and stay unbreakable. Alright everybody, thanks for watching this week's episode of Sabaton History Channel. Don't forget to subscribe, become a patron, support us, and see you soon.